an increased frequency and also increased intensity of natural disasters like hurricanes and things of that sort that have highlighted the need for geohazard mitigation. What are your thoughts there?
A lot of things that we grapple with in the here and now in society and in our daily lives, you use the term increasing, right? Like an increased frequency or increased magnitude. They view the world through that lens. In some ways, I'm a bit biased, I think, as a geologist, thinking about sort of just longer term time scale of changes that the Earth has undergone. And I think the regime that we're currently in,
Did you know that natural disasters have nearly doubled in frequency over the past 2 decades, with geohazards like landslides, flooding, and soil erosion playing a major role in their devastating impact? As these events grow more intense, the importance of proactive geohazard mitigation has never been clearer. In this episode, I'll be speaking with Simon Boone, PG, Director of Engineering at GeoStabilization International. We'll be talking about the importance of geohazard mitigation strategies in preventing and responding to earthquakes, landslides, floods, and other natural disasters such as hurricanes and the like. We'll be talking about early warning systems for infrastructure design and also community preparedness as we delve into the most effective ways to safeguard human life and property. I'm your host, Jared Green, and I'm excited to be bringing you another episode of the Geotechnical Engineering Podcast. With that, let's dive right into today's episode. Simon, welcome to the show. How are you doing, man?
Doing well. How are you today?
Excellent. I'm doing great. I was really looking forward to getting to meet you and talk with you, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers are as well. So it would be great if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and, how did you become involved in geohazard mitigation? Like, did you grow up saying, I want to be in this field? Like, how'd you get there? How'd you get involved here?
Certainly. So I like to say I kind of fell into it. So I it wasn't something I had no legacy. My parents weren't engineers. I grew up, my dad's a metal fabricator, grew up in a rural area in Virginia on a farm, and grew up in a kind of that kind of lifestyle. And I pursued my education, left home, ended up at James Madison University. Thought I wanted to go to the medical field at first. And I ran headfirst into organic chemistry a couple years in as a chemistry major. And it really set me back. It really just showed me what a challenge that was. And maybe that wasn't exactly what I wanted to end up doing. And I ended up pivoting over to the geology department and ran some really good folks there, and had a lot of passion for what they'd done, and folks that they're quite well into their career beyond, some educators. And I didn't grow up learning a lot about geology, and I immediately found it just quite fascinating, and always interested in the outdoors, fairly well traveled, I think, as a kid, coast to coast, had family out west. And when I kind of dipped my toe into the water with the geology department there, it was like seeing everything with new eyes. So all the travels I'd done, all the things that I started to connect and click and really think about the world, the natural world around me. And that was a real fascination early on. I think still the physical geology, one of my favorite courses I took all the way through, just kind of the learning about the world around you and how it impacts your day-to-day life and what that means for folks. It was kind of how I fell into this lane. And, ultimately, in my course of education, discovered engineering geology, and I think that it complemented sort of the practical nature of my upbringing and sort of what my interests and maybe strengths were. And I fell into that, and through the course of my undergrad there at James Madison, I ended up meeting a gentleman who had a consulting business, a geotechnical engineering consulting business, and he was focused on geohazard mitigation. And I ended up, after some time, getting a chance to go to work for a company. And that's really where I got my first taste of what this world, this sort of practice is within the engineering space that we're talking about, as far as the buzzword of geohazards, what that means in terms of our world, how we approach it, solve for it, tackle it, so to speak, as engineers and geologists in our lane. And I think that's not the whole backstory, but that's a good color to get us started.
Excellent. I appreciite that. I when I was looking at your bio, when get ready to talk to you, I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, he's a director of engineering. He's a professional geologist. I was like, how's that possible? How's that work? Talk a little bit about that, because I'm sure I'm not the first person to ask you.
Sure, and it's funny. I can share an anecdote. One of the folks I ran into in the company that I had met last year, but he'd been around a long time. I introduced myself in a meeting, and I said, "Hey, you guys, what do you do here?" So I'm the director of engineering, but I'm an engineering geologist. And he goes, "Yeah, I thought it was really funny that they gave you that role. You're not an engineer." I said, "Well, me too," but then I kind of laughed it off. But I said, I spent my whole career supporting engineers, and
Mhm.
really, in a lot of ways, a complementary role to what enables us to be successful as practitioners in this lane of geotechnical engineering. Starting out, in the early days of my career, just absorbing all the information that was thrown at me, every experience, just understanding a bit more about what drives the practice, what challenges we face, where I fit into the whole scheme of things in terms of like what does the engineering geologist do, what does the geotechnical engineer do, and as I progressed upward through my career, understanding more that the particular skill set that I have, in a lot of ways, we wear a similar hat, right? So we may both, whether you have the educational experience, title, and role of geotechnical engineer or engineering geologist, you may at any given time in your career find yourself doing some exploratory investigation for a project, whether that's on a drill rig, drilling a hole, logging the material, selecting for samples, or you're doing some field mapping, whether it be, just general geological mapping for the rock outcropping or for any particular, hazard that you may be encountering, seismic, subsidence, the list goes on. And sort of, where I found myself in that. So that's a little bit of the explainer about like, hey, how do you end up in that role? The company, the organization that we're part of now, we're a geohazard solutions provider in a lot of ways, is a simple way to say it. At one point we could have been adequately characterized as a design build contractor focused on geohazards, but as we've evolved and grown as a company, there's a lot of things we do now that we didn't necessarily focus on in the old days. And the group that I'm a part of particularly focuses on our design build work that we develop for clients, and offers a turnkey approach from concept solution basically all the way through to being able to construct it and deliver it. Anyway, the progression of my career is a part of that. A lot of the things that it probably led to me being in the seat today. I spent the first good half of my career today in the consulting world, so, supporting the typical geotech work that we see in consulting, right? From that end of it, a lot of exploratory, analysis, writing a report ultimately that you hand to the client with some recommendations about how to proceed with the issue at hand. And then I pivoted. I took an opportunity to go to work for a contractor that was very focused on the rockfall, landslide, debris flow mitigation. That was a particular interest to me, and the stars kind of aligned for me to take that on. And I wore a lot of hats there, and I learned a lot of polish to the business aspects of my skill set that started out at face value in project management, which ultimately is where a lot of folks, by the time they kind of get to journeyman career as a geotechnical engineer, you end up doing that within consulting, or if you're in public service or whatever you might have. Ultimately, as you work your way up, you end up managing something. But I happened to kind of do a stint in that project management role for a construction company, and I was able to really apply a lot of the knowledge and experience I've gained as a young engineering geologist, a lot of field time, a lot of just really good exposure to the actual hazards, how we diagnose what those are, how we evaluate them, how we work hand in hand with engineers to offer solutions. And then I got to be a part of the actually fixing it a lot of times. And so I really, really enjoyed that chapter in my career where I was able to have a real practical sort of aspect of like the actual constructing of the work, but also spent a lot of time developing work with clients who were my former counterparts at clients. So, whether it was, counterparts in public service, like transportation agencies that were grappling with, a landslide or something that we may offer a solution for, I ended up finding myself in the field, really, hands-on helping solve it, and then being able to come up with a solution that, actually solve it. And so that's a lot of what I did when my company that I was with there, as I described, ultimately was merged with the GSI brand. I had an opportunity to come on board and sort of enter my former world back into the professional design space. but kind of apply some of those project management, people management skills that I gained along the way. I was given an opportunity to lead a really, really awesome group here, which is what I've been doing for the last year or so, and really excited about really what we're up to, and shared that here today as a part of that in my current role.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Thank you so much for that. It always fascinates me that career progression is usually not linear. You learn different things, you apply different things, and if I was to say to you 20 years ago, did you think you'd be exactly where you are now? You're probably like, no.
No, I don't think I would have dreamed. Definitely not have dreamed this progression of exactly where I've ended up.
Yeah.
But it's been a very rich journey. Not always easy, not always fun, but in the end of it, very, very rich and enjoyable. And I'm glad to have had all the experiences that I've had.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. No, it sounds like you really made the best of these experiences, which is great for you. So let's see. When I look around what's happening around us, there's definitely been an increased frequency and also increased intensity of natural disasters like hurricanes and things of that sort that have highlighted the need for geohazard mitigation. What are your thoughts there?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So as we discussed, with my background as an engineering geologist, a lot of things that we grapple with in the here and now in society and in our daily lives, you use the term increasing, right? Like an increased frequency or increased magnitude. And for most folks, I think that is a lot, of the way that they view the world through that lens. In some ways, I'm a bit biased, I think, as a geologist, thinking about sort of just longer term time scale of changes that the Earth has undergone. And I think the regime that we're currently in, at the human scale, at our lifespan, it seems very dramatic in a lot of ways all the time. I think in so many ways, we definitely are living through at a human experience level, which you could adequately characterize as an increased frequency and magnitude events. I think of the events of 2024 and here in early 2025, as we said, we're thinking about the just storm events and weather events that we've grappled with as a society, as professional practitioners in our lane of the Hurricane Helene that really hit the North Carolina, Tennessee region really hard back in the fall, and then in the Southern California area, the dramatic wildfires that we're experiencing. What my perspective on it is that as I've gone through my career, a lot of the investigation that I've been a part of. For example, debris flows that come a lot of times post-wildfire. We're talking about kind of what LA's grappling with right now. A lot of what we see in the geologic record is that there's just intervals, periods of quiescence, and then there's dramatic change, right? And we see that all of that stuff is repeated, over varying intervals, some much beyond human lifespans, but, we're grappling with the same stuff as in the human experience and as a society, whether we happen to be, what part of the U.S. we're in, what part of the world we're in, whether we're living today or years ago. We're on this big rock and we're going around it every day, and all the geomorphic processes and all the stuff that we do to influence the world around us that might be driving changes there. We're grappling with the experience of that and some of the outcomes that we may be responsible for there as well. So, in a lot of ways, the practice that we find ourselves in this lane of geotech, it's very much front and center, right? Our practice is zeroed around the interface between the earth, the ground, and the built environment. And so anything that might be able to move or rapidly changing state, as far as the earth is related, it impacts us, as humans and our experience there.
Yeah, got it. Now, in your opinion, why would you say it's crucial for companies and municipalities to prioritize proactive geohazard mitigation efforts?
I like this question. I think this is a really important question for society as a whole, because on some level we're all citizens, we're all taxpayers, we all carry a bit of the load, right? Whether whatever decisions are made around events that happen, right? Whether it's something completely beyond our control, like insurance premiums rising as a result of massive losses in a natural disaster, or if on like a state or regional or federal scale, or if it's something way more personal, like your experience in a rockfall event or a landslide or a debris flow impacting your home, um, there's knock-on effects of, call it ignorance and a failure to plan in some ways. And there's also, there's just considerations as a whole. So, for example, I've got a lot of friends throughout areas of practice, right? Some in public service, some in private work, and we all, in one way or the other, as we grapple with geohazards, we face this, whether it be, we got it linked in terms of figuring out what the issue is, how to solve it, what might be done, but we might face an issue actually implementing that because there's no funding for it, or we may be grappling in that there's a major event. If I think about some of my counterparts in the transportation space, and if you work for a public agency, and anybody that's lived through an extreme event, realizes this, that you have some dramatic emergency event that overwhelms your resources, right? And you're maxed out. There's a lot of stress. You're trying to respond to the need without adequate planning, right? We can't plan for everything, but there's a lot you could do to be prepared. Without adequate planning for sort of these extreme events that we experience, whether it be a flood or a fire or a landslide, that kind of thing, you get overwhelmed, you get jammed up, and ultimately you can't affect the best outcome, right? And so I think the question around, the critical considerations of why planning is a big piece of it has to do with, managing risk, right? And being able to respond effectively. Spent a lot of time in California in my career, and since I've been there, I've not lived through a major earthquake with a lot of damage, but some of my mentors, my peers, my counterparts have lived through a lot of events. And I think the Loma Prieta earthquake event in the Bay Area, comes to mind in terms of something that was, it was during the World Series. It was called on television to captivate a lot of people's attention in the event. But the folks on the ground, whether they worked for the transportation network or whatever infrastructure was impacted, it was just, the world was upset on, turned upside down. The transportation networks were broken. You're trying to respond. Folks have got to get to their, get about their daily lives, right? Whether it's getting to work, getting home, getting food, taking care of the kids, whatever it was, and it shakes you all of a sudden, and it often comes quite quickly and not necessarily with much warning. And so I think it's really important, to be ready. To disaster preparedness is hugely important. And it's not just for local governments. It's not for agencies, on a personal level, on a professional level in practice. I think you got to be ready for it because it can be taxing, and understanding your piece that you play in it. If you're responding, whether you're hired, your company's hired to help, or the agency you're part of is responding, or you're just living the event yourself personally, just having your wits about you, so to speak, and be ready to respond at what natural, disaster impacts you may be, the risk you may be living with wherever you are at the time.
Yeah. Good the way you said it. I mean, the reality is that, you have to be prepared first, right? Like you can't get prepared during. It's like you have to be prepared first. There's a lot of pre-work that has to happen from a municipality standpoint, from a agency standpoint, organization standpoint, and like you said, personal standpoint as well. So really, really, really crucial things to consider there. And if we change gears a little bit, what would you say are the what would you say are the most critical considerations when you're designing a mitigation strategy as it relates to infrastructure in areas that are prone to hurricanes and other natural disasters?
Oh, that's a good one. I think critical considerations to mitigate disasters. I think just to boil it down maybe into a slice of that, because it seems like a pretty you could go pretty could be very broad there, and hurricanes, every natural disaster has its own set of risks, right, that are posed to the public. I think strategy wise, we grapple with this a lot as a society. The critical considerations as an engineer, a lot of engineering is really how do you deal with constraints? How do you if you don't have all the cards in the deck on the table available to you, and your back's pinned against the wall, and you got to come up with the most favorable outcome? On some level, we're all faced with that. And I think it rings true a lot in the engineering space. You never have all the luxury of everything. Maybe it's not the luxury of time. Maybe it's not the luxury of money. Maybe it's not the luxury of the resource. So the crucial aspect of the strategy is really, from a sense of first principles, is scoping the problem adequately and determining what your objective to solve is for. I think that in some ways there'll never be enough money to solve for everything, right? So for hurricanes that are somewhat unpredictable in terms of their track, you couldn't do hardening of impacted facilities, but you could do things like you know, including adequate maintenance in anything that you design in the built environment, right? So many of the schemes that we come up with as engineers, they're very effective within the bounds of their design. But if they maybe aren't, a drain, for example, and in the flooding context, if it's not adequately maintained, it's not worth very much, and it might have knock-on effects that make other things worse. I think for folks who are maybe listening in and thinking about what impacts do I have maybe as an engineer practicing, and how do I take this and apply it to my profession. And I think we always have to be cautious as we're approaching stuff, and you can always do belt and suspenders and overdo it, but that may not be the ultimately the best use of resources, and ultimately it kind of picks at the heart of what engineering is really coming up with an elegant solution when you don't have all the resources available, perhaps, and really something that's very clever and innovative to solve a problem. I think about a lot of what we grapple with in our company and in the lane that we support here, of wanting to put the very best solution forward. In a lot of ways we think about it as client best value. In a lot of ways that rings true of saying we need something very practical that can be affected quickly in a lot of cases, but that will stretch the resource dollar as far as possible, right? Like a lot of times the impacts of these storms are so wide ranging and expansive that you may not be able to solve for everything all at once, but the critical strategy is saying, okay, how can I make something better, and what practical thing can we do here to do it? What outcome are we trying to drive? And just kind of approaching it with that mindset, I think affects a good chance of success. I think in terms of engineering, sometimes we strive to take on too much and then may ultimately fail. And that I think sometimes is a black mark at times in the profession when we try something and sometimes we're experimenting and we know it may not be successful, but ultimately in the profession, some of our failures get memorialized quite publicly. And so, considerations around, sort of the chances that we're given to iterate and try something and what the risks are there, maybe personally, professionally, but overall, like, you want to make sure that what you're doing is careful, thought out, has an outcome in mind, weighs the risks, and doesn't somehow, leave a black mark on the profession as a result of, poorly planned approach to something.
Yeah. And there's definitely, an aspect of just articulating those risks ahead of time, right? Like if we take this approach, these are the things that could happen if we take this approach, so that it's not just the engineer, right? It's the team, and the ownership has, a stake in that as well. And, when you said that, I'm thinking that, yeah, publicly when things go wrong, you do hear a lot, but oftentimes when things go right, we don't hear much,
Well,
which is unfortunate.
Absolutely. I think that one of the areas that we get marked in the engineering space as so a lot of times the accusation may be levied against us as professionals of, well, engineers aren't great communicators. I think that, and sometimes it's fair, right? And sometimes you're operating at a high level, at a fast pace among professionals, and you've moved on, and you're living in the jargon, and you're living in sort of the assumptions. But what we do impacts the public, and in a lot of ways, sometimes it's just spelling it out simply of, hey, this is the design criteria. This is what we expect to happen, so that, we're defining what the acceptable level of risk was at the time of undertaking it, so that if there's anything to be debated about the effectiveness of it, we at least have the defense to ourselves to say, hey, we knew that maybe we weren't going to solve everything, but this is what we set out to solve, and here's how we graded our success.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's like, what would success look like? I can remember, working on projects, hardening projects after Superstorm Sandy in the Northeast. And, we were looking at, and it was like, well, what would success look like? And you have to really go through what that would look like. And then that really determines the extent of your hardening, right? It's like if you're okay with going out without power for this many days, or if you want, it's very interesting to when you go through that exercise, because you have to we have to get some input. Otherwise, success for me might look different than success to the owner. And if those two don't align, then you're right. We're poor communicators, because we say, "Hey, there happened to be another storm, and this would happen," and the client says, "No, that's not good. That's not what I want." It's just like communication is super important.
But I think we recognize that as a profession, and we see that reflected in a lot of ways. I've been given a tremendous amount of learning opportunities through mentoring in my careers of just really perfecting my technical writing and my written communication, because the another accusation that we get labeled with often is particularly the geologist in the profession of the hand waving arguments that we do. We like to go out in the field and make broad sweeping statements that are difficult to refute. But it's really, really important that you can communicate effectively in writing. And we know this about ourselves as well, right? If you look at the legislature in most states, like there's rules for contracts, there's rules for what a engagement letter for an engineering scope should be, so that it protects the public and it's clear to the practitioner that says, hey, you should have a written contract. You should clearly define the scope about what you're going to do and what the deliverable will be, to avoid any kind of misalignment there, to strengthen the profession and to allow us to operate effectively.
Excellent, excellent. So let's do this. Let's see. Can you discuss a geohazard mitigation project that you've worked on, and some of the highlights and importance of proactive planning and engineering solutions? This might be new for some folks that are listening in. So you walk us through that. I think that would help us a lot.
Certainly. Oh yeah, there's a lot. I think that I'll probably pick one that I've worked on closely. I'll pick a simple one to start with, and maybe if you let me run on long enough, I'll share another anecdote. But
Okay.
one of the projects I really enjoyed working on, sort of in my journeyman years as a project geologist and consulting, was an opportunity to do a sort of a site investigation for a water treatment plant facility, water reclamation facility near my hometown. It was going to supply, to really upgrade and provide resiliency and redundancy. And, a big part of what, had to do there in California to satisfy the requirements of the planning, which is, a result of a lot of, folks who came before me and had it well thought out, was there's the checklist for geotechnical reports, by the time you go to submit stuff to the county, and it's like it's like the smell test. Like, hey, did we check everything we should have checked, right? And so in the area I was working, we had seismic risk, we had landslide risk, we had fault rupture risk. There were serpentines, so we had asbestos that needed to be, checked. There was a number of things, right? And it was cool because we kind of got to start from sort of a virgin site that was open ranch land that was going to be developed. And so I got to really, think about what could go wrong, right? Like how many things could go wrong here that would potentially impact the facility through its life cycle. And I really enjoyed that. I think it's good to get in on the sort of the beginning and watch it progress. And ultimately, in the consulting lane, often your recommendations are taken. They're collated with other folks' reports, and the project, by the time it gets let and constructed, you may have completely lost track of it. But because that one was fairly close to home for me, able to kind of track it as it went through. And some of the things we identified in the report about risks in the planning phase and in the investigation phase ended up playing out. So related to some cut slope recommendations, we end up saying, hey, you need the footprint, you're constrained in terms of the topography. You got some slopes here. The geology is not ideal. You definitely want to constrain that footprint, not to dig into the toe slope. You'll be forced into a corner to cut it steeper than you ought to, and you probably create a slip out, and it'll be a headache. And and those kind of things. And then watching those play out when they go to construction and saying, it's all, the hyperbole of "I told you so" is generally never fun when you're wrapped around the axle of a project that's kind of gone sideways at any given time. But it also illustrates the importance of getting it right in the investigative space. And so, I think the proactive portion of that is like, you've got to look for those things. Those have big impacts, right? Whether it ends up impacting the project schedule and the cost overrun that ultimately lands at the foot of the taxpayer, or, God forbid, something's overlooked and then there's a life or health safety event, that comes according to it. So it really just kind of underscores the importance of what we do as far as a discipline and the careful carrying out of that with regard to our profession and what side of things we grapple with here.
Got it. It's so interesting. Like when I talk to folks that, as I'm sure you do, folks are deciding what they want to do from a academic standpoint. What major should they have, right? And there's so many different things you could do with a geology background, and it's this concept of geohazard mitigation. This is something that really does tie back to people, and I think that that's something it's really powerful when you see somebody, oh, I want to make a difference, I want to change the world, I want to help people, but like, yeah, geohazard mitigation plays a, a, a real role in protecting vulnerable communities and also minimizing economic losses. What are your thoughts there? Like, what do those roles look like?
Oh yeah, in a big way. I think this is something that comes up quite often in my daily life in this role that I currently reprise here. Um, it comes up discussing with current staff about sort of the meaning of the work that we do in our lane. It also comes up a lot when I'm recruiting, right? And when I'm talking to folks that are just now in college, figuring out what they want to do with their life, understand they have a passion for engineering, geology, want to do something practical, seeking meaning in following their passions and what they may end up doing in their career. And then some of the anecdotes that come to mind around the topic of how does what meaning does it all have, right? Like, so the work that we do, the careful practice, the learning, the experience, the body of knowledge, sharing this, playing out in our professional life as we go about day to day grappling with stuff. Like, what effect does it have on society? I think one of the really cool things about the particular opportunities I've been afforded in my career, and particularly now in terms of the company I work for, like, it provides a lot of meaning and satisfaction that the work that we do in some way it impacts the safety of the traveling public in a lot of ways, or it impacts the quality of the service that is provided that we rely on. So a lot of the work that we do ends up being around infrastructure, whether it be like linear in nature, such as transportation networks, like keeping the road open so you can get home, so that a landslide isn't happening around the corner in the dark on your way home, and you're out of the road, and you face risks to your health and safety or your ability to get home. Or if it's a matter of, hey, keeping clean water, or water conveyances to have public services like fire hydrants or whatever the case may be. Our role in that and how that impacts the most vulnerable members of society is that we, in a lot of ways, I communicate to folks when I'm speaking, particularly about what I do, is in a lot of ways it's pretty simple. It's a lot. We're like the janitors of the infrastructure world. We're trying to keep the thing running, take the investment that was made originally, keeping the lights on, so to speak, making sure that the facility has the adequate uptime or utilization to provide the service that was intended. So, like, from a philosophical standpoint, sort of the pact with society, right? That is, you pay your taxes, and to good folks in government invested appropriately, and you develop things that we've come to rely on in the modern society, like electricity, water, fire service, all the bits that there's somebody out there that's paying attention and doing the good work to keep those investments running and working effectively, so that the members of society, that maybe aren't as the most educated or the most, in the position to have the luxuries and the wealth available to them to secure their own security in terms of like where they choose to live, that they still have access to, the things that are important, right? The clean water, the safe roadway. And so, rockfall mitigation is an aspect of it that I've had a very close touch to in my career. And I can think about the different ways and places that I've installed it, and some of the maybe folks that were impacted by it. Sometimes it's on a major multi-lane super highway, and the just thousands of average daily traffic counts going by, and you can multiply the risk and think about it that way, not know who might be in those vehicles. And then in others, it's been some backwoodsy type of place, far out in the hinter regions of the state, and there's only a few folks living up a holler, that are impacted by it. But you're ensuring that that public road is open for them to be able to go to and from work and the doctor and wherever else they need to go. And I think it's kind of cool to see that. You see that a lot, certainly the blue collar folks that we work with that are out there every day delivering building these projects. You see it, right? The traffic backs up. You see it, the different faces, the different vehicles that drive by. And I've always just enjoyed sort of the blending of the different folks in society that are impacted by the work we do.
Excellent. What are some of the common challenges that geotechnical engineers face in implementing mitigation strategies?
Well, there's many. Often it's the pressure of time, right? So if I think about, a lot of the geohazards that we face, usually it's some type of emergent event, whether or not it could be totally predicted or managed, maybe is up for debate depending on where it's at and what the context is. But, oftentimes, for us dealing with infrastructure, the uptime of that network is huge. So there's often a lot of pressure. So for us in a design build context, if something goes sideways, the client reaches out, call it, rail network, a highway, what have you. They're in some bind that they need us to be able to act quick. And it doesn't matter if it's Friday night or Christmas Eve or when it is, there's an urgent need to act. And so being able to just be very good at what we do, be very confident in the recommendations that we're making and the choices we're putting forward, to have a really high technical acumen and confidence that it's diagnosed appropriately and putting to good effect. It's always challenging because you never have the luxury of in sort of in a geohazard response, right? You don't necessarily have the luxury to do all the things you might do if not for the urgency to act. But so you're tasked with, what can we do to get the facility back running and safely do so. And it's always a lot of pressure. I feel like, whether it's, if your role on the team is even just the guy that's drafting the plans together, it's really crucially important that all those details are correct and it's as quickly as possible in the hands of the folks that are going to build it so we can affect it, getting back online. Or if you're all the way at the sort of the front of the process where you're trying to scope and do it to adequate diagnosis of the issue so that you can confidently say, hey, the fix we're going to employ will take care of it. And when we get it done, you will be able to safely reopen the facility. I think those are all sort of illustrative components to the challenges we face. And probably the biggest piece of it is not always having all the information to make the best decision. We're pretty comfortable, I think, as practitioners, realizing that we don't have the ultimate view of the data we need. We play in the gray space a lot in the geotech world. You get a sampling of holes and a subsampling of that data set of particular samples that you collected. And then if you goofed the collection of any of it, maybe you only have a smaller sample than you had intended to get. But still, you got to be able to adequately characterize the ground conditions and move forward. And so many different challenges, right? But that, I think, a lot of that and the ability to sort of, adapt, improvise, overcome, and achieve through that is what really brings a lot of the richness in our profession and a lot of the satisfaction about being able to get the job done despite any onslaught of things that might trip you up.
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. First thing came to mind for me is just that, you may be trying to gather information to, assess a situation, and it's not safe to gather said information. So you have to make, assumptions based on limited pieces of information you're able to gather. So that it's tricky and it's challenging, these strategies. And, when you think about these mitigation strategies, how do they differ when you're dealing with, let's say, hurricanes compared to other natural disasters? And I keep saying hurricanes because I think about, folks that I talk to, they know nothing about geology, nothing about engineering. When they hear storms and the name of the storm and the letter, they're like, how do we have so many storms this year, right? So we do think about hurricanes a lot, but how do their strategies differ across different types of natural disasters?
I think the scope, scale, and timing of the impact, I think, is probably a differentiator. Hurricane, in a lot of ways with modern technology, while we can't predict it in the long term, in the short term, in the days interval, you have an opportunity to say, oh boy, this is the predicted track. These are the folks that are going to be impacted. There's a lot of planning that can happen, warnings, evacuations, that kind of thing. Even still, there's some things that you can't do much about, right? And the on balance, the weight of acting versus not acting in terms of the risk of where that might go, you're weighing that as you're navigating. What do you do? Do you uproot all these folks out of their homes and get them moving out, or is that the right call given the thrash and turmoil it's going to cause for the folks relative to other disasters? Earthquakes, fires, the unpredictable, fast moving at times. Just chaos brought immediately, and you're purely reactive. The outcome of some of the different disasters, may feel more visceral. So like with the hurricane, the winds knocking down the trees, knocking out the power, blowing the roofs off, followed by the rain, that creates the flooding and scouring and jamming up the bridges and, just inundation of homes and businesses. Those are very visceral and happening in real time, and you might get swept away by a flood versus a fire. Maybe the community resources did a great job, and everyone, all lives were saved, and most structures were saved, which is a hallmark of success for a lot of that effort. But then there's latent challenges. I think of a lot of the arid west debris flow is a real hallmark of post wildfire, and you see the burn scar, you think, oh gee, it's ugly, gosh, the forest is gone. But what's laying there in wait is that next storm, given enough intensity of rainfall, may just trigger, in the right topography, may just trigger a debris flow that then roars down into the lowlands, or perhaps a developed area, and impacts somewhere that folks are living or working. Right, those are a bit more latent, hazards that are lying there in wait for you. So I think that maybe illustrates a little bit of how you have to grapple with things differently, but a lot of it really goes into the hard work and experience of professionals like myself and you who've lived through some of those things, and you're the voice in the profession, in the communities, and in government that says, hey, even though that this has been a while since this happened, like this could still occur. So whether it's the hazard mapping like we do with flooding or debris flows now more commonly in the U.S., those are all things that we parlay out of those experiences, right? And say, like, hey, this was a hard lesson learned, and we need to share it and remember it, so that we're able to respond effectively and really try to affect the best outcome possible, right? In terms of the human experience, both with life and safety and investment.
Oh, that's great. This is a nice segue into my next question. What are some of the long-term benefits of investing in, let's say hurricane-specific mitigation measures? What are some of those benefits?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think that the long-term benefits is just the avoidance of pain.
Mm-hmm.
I think to boil it down so simply, right? Like
Yeah.
the effects, right? In whatever lane you're operating, and try to have an impact on positive impact on what you commit your efforts to. You do really want to drive a positive outcome. Whether you hear that a lot in medical space, you hear that in our world as well, increasingly where we say, hey, what's the outcome going to be? The long-term benefits, are a multitude, right? One of the things that we grapple with as a society that's heavy on my mind today is just that you take a look at the outcome of these disasters. Oftentimes, it's a gut punch to many who find themselves on the wrong side of an insurance policy, or not having one, with no ability to recoup the loss, or even when we have adequate insurance, it's such a massive loss to the system that it drives a change, whether it's a reboot of the market, or some pain that comes with not being able to get a policy after the event happened. This thrash that exists in society because of that, it impacts folks way beyond our profession, right? Citizens of all stripes. And I think that the benefits of investing and planning and trying to be as prescriptive as possible at mitigating the risk of these disasters that we grapple with as a society is really just the furtherment of our own existence. It's really tough. Folks are faced with, if you can't rebuild, to give up on that. If it was your home, right? You can't rebuild. You give up on that wealth creation that is a result of many years of investment and hard work, and you got to reset, and you end up perhaps on government assistance because the dice rolled and it came up snake eyes for you, right? It's a terrible outcome. And, I think as a society, the long-term benefits, the hallmark, I think, of success here for us as we grapple in my generation, those before me and after me, is how are we going to effectively manage this to allow our children and those around us to continue having a reasonable existence that's not thwarted, in all sides with some catastrophic risk, right? I think really that's where my mind goes there.
Thank you so much. All right. So before we take our break, let's see, Simon, what's your final piece of advice you want to give to geotechnical engineers and geologists, structural geologists that might be listening or watching? What's your advice for how they can strive to develop more resilient infrastructure to withstand the impacts of natural disasters?
I think personally, drawing from my experience, my educational background, really, really the diagnosis of the issue, make sure you get that right. Make sure you understand the geological context within which you are working to give the ultimate solution that you come up with the best chance at success and longevity, that the design life you can get the best ROI possible. I think that resilience is a big word in our industry today, right? I think in a lot of ways the generations before us built out a lot of things in this country, and now we're tasked with keeping them running and getting as much out of that as investment as possible. And a lot of our current application of what we do in our daily practice is about making every dollar count and making every solution last longer and be more well thought out, right? To take a fuller picture of all the lessons we've learned. I think that to give a simple example, in the years prior, generations before, we approached a lot of civil construction with regard to the way that we engineered slopes with a heavy dose of explosives. And we are now living with a legacy of overbreak and shattered rock slopes that have generated a lot of ongoing issues for us. So I think a lot, to use the analog again of the medical profession, the do no harm, right? Even though you might think that that's the tool of today and it's the bee's knees, and you think that it's just doesn't require any further, thought or stewing on, take the extra care to think about what the knock-on impacts might be of what you're prescribing, because a lot of what we do ultimately ends up in having an outcome and a result, something that gets built, dollars that get invested, folks that have lives impacted, and the things that we do today will live. Our practice, the results of that practice, will live on in the infrastructure we create in the years and decades to come.
That's a great note to pause on. Thank you so much. So we're going to come back in just a minute and close this one out with Simon and our career factor safety in segment. Stick around. All right, welcome back. It's time for our career factor safety in segment. In geotechnical engineering, just like many disciplines of engineering, it's important to incorporate a factor safety into your design. But what about incorporating a factor safety into your career? Today, of course, we're speaking with Simon Boone, PG, Director of Engineering at GeoStabilization International. Simon, you've already had a very successful career. And when you look back on your career, what's something you've implemented in your career to give yourself, I don't know, let's call it a factor safety in your career?
Oh man, that's a good one. I read the prompt, but I hadn't really, I think, fully thought that out. So, I think as an analog with design that you kind of get queued up there, the things, if we're looking at it on balance as leveling the forces, right? Balance the driving forces and resisting forces, and seeing how those things stack up as a ratio of each other, as being the definition of what that factor of safety would be. I think the things in my career that have contributed to a factor of safety above one has definitely been the willingness and ability on my part to leverage every opportunity as a learning experience and tuck that away somewhere in the quiver that it has an impact on what I do going forward. I can think of a lot of things that I did in the early sort of salad days of my career that I don't necessarily leverage on a daily basis, but are really nice to pull from occasionally, and serve, I think, to give me a multifaceted sort of skill set, right? I think what draws and drives a factor of safety in your career could be many things, given sort of the twists and turns your journey may take. But it really makes you, a lot like, perhaps a quarterback, right? If you can run it, throw the ball, well, you're a threat, and you're not sure, people aren't sure how to pin you in a cork, kind of speak. And so if you get faced with some difficulty at some juncture in your career, and the rugs pull out from under you, and you need to be able to flip back on your feet like a cat, you've got a few tricks to draw out of your bag to perhaps give you the ability to kind of bounce back and move forward. And so I don't know that I could say that I with intention implemented it, but I've certainly got a good breadth of experience that I've been able to draw from that's given me the ability to do many different things in my career and reprise different roles. And I think that has ultimately culminated and to give me quite a well-rounded skill set that enables me to do more than just one thing. And I think that's what I would kind of hang the answer on.
I'll take that. Yeah, you're really keying in on the growth mindset as opposed to the all or nothing, right? So it's like, all or nothing would be you win or you lose. The growth mindset is you win or you learn. So that's really, really awesome. Well, Simon, thank you so much for coming on, sharing all the great insights of that. You shared some really great information and advice that's going to be helpful for our listeners and also for those that are watching. Somebody wanted to reach out to you. What's the best way for them to get your social media? You have an email you want to share? We can put in the show notes.
I certainly would put my email here as I'm participating in this, flying the flag of the organization here. I'd be happy to share that, put the shingle out, so to speak. Folks that are active on LinkedIn, I suppose, can find me that way.
Okay.
Either way would be a great way to connect.
Okay, excellent. So thank you so much. It was great. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed the episode today. We would love to hear your feedback, comments, and or questions. Please feel free to go to geotechnicalengineeringpodcast.com, where you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as any links to any resources, websites, or books mentioned during this episode. Until next time, we wish you the very best in all of your geotechnical engineering endeavors. Peace.